welcome to SHOWstudio. It's our last men's roundup panel discussion, and we're going to be talking about the Paris shows. I'm also going to ask you guys briefly about Raf maybe as well, because obviously that was missing off the Paris schedule and just was just shown in New York. I think it's quite an interesting season. I don't want to repeat ourselves across every panel, because basically every men's roundup that we've done, we've talked a lot about all the changes that are happening in menswear and the kind of the threats to menswear and what have you, which I think was quite evident in Paris, because there was that strange last day where suddenly all the women's wear press arrived and we were like going to shows, and then all the women's wear editors were there because Kenzo and Paul Smith did these kind of joint shows. But there were a lot of really sort of amazing moments that I think sum up a lot of the state of fashion today and sort of the pace of the industry. I think the Louis Vuitton Supreme collaboration has, like, you know, the collaboration that launched 1,000 headlines, everyone's talking about it. And I think it sort of sums up a lot of the themes that are coming out in fashion at the moment about this constant sort of high-low hookup, unexpected hookup. It's kind of moved past the days where it's like an artist would do a small collaboration with a brand. It's like these huge collaborations. And I think it was an interesting season sort of summarising the now. But before we sort of dive into our discussions, I'll let my fabulous set of panellists, joined us early this morning, introduce themselves, starting with you, Stavros.
Hello, I'm Stavros Karelis, and I'm the founder and buying director of Machine A.
I'm Helen Seamons, I'm the menswear editor for Guardian and The Observer.
Hello, I'm Chodha, and I'm a fashion writer.
So, guys, what did we think of Paris? I just went on a monologue about what I thought. What does everyone else think about some of those themes that I mentioned? Dal, you're looking intently at the screen, so I'm going to go to you.
Okay, so we saw a lot of North Face collaborations, which I thought was significant, because there were a couple of people that I was kind of with, my colleagues, who hadn't really ever saw North Face as a thing. But of course, I think it really is. It's if it's a bit like when you look at gym wear. What sort of thing would someone who's into fashion wear to the gym? And you know, it's kind of traditionally been Nike, but they've been good at forging that relationship. I think the North Face has similarly done that with, I guess, outerwear, kind of more performance outerwear. So that was really interesting to see how both Junya Watanabe and Sakai kind of interpreted those brands in their own way. So I thought that was really interesting, and that kind of led on, of course, to the Vuitton Supreme, which...
What is the appeal? It's interesting you talked about the North Face there, because there is this element of, you're seeing, you know, traditionally the collaborations were often between either, you know, when it was kind of an avant-garde thing, the way Marc Jacobs did it, would it be with an artist or an individual, and then that became that sort of trend for doing a collaboration with another high fashion brand, which almost was quite a humorous, you know, Louis Vuitton and Chanel together, ha ha ha, look at our minds. It's quite, you know, quite fantastic. But now it's moved into this strange area where it's almost like you can't quite work out who's trying to sort of profit from who, which is maybe the sign of a successful collaboration, but it feels like luxury brands are trying to sort of tap into some of the veneer of authenticity that exists around something like a North
Those
Face.
in-jokes, those collaboration in-jokes that maybe traditionally we would have seen don't really work so much anymore. Because of course the fashion isn't this kind of in this bubble. It is kind of open for everyone to access, for everyone to see. So I think it makes more sense for the collaborations to kind of reflect that.
And maybe make it accessible for everyone to then buy. Because I was thinking that with those like Kotweiler Reebok, like if you liked Kotweiler, you could then buy it if you couldn't afford it before.
But I think also it has to do, from a commercial point of view, it has to do definitely with, you know, opening up to a new type of customer. You know, if for example you're Louis Vuitton, you know, and obviously you're a luxury brand, you know, to open up like to a customer that is like the Supreme type of customer, you know, you have to change the whole story behind the brand and, you know, offer completely new type of products. With this collaboration particularly, you know, you can open up to a whole new type of customer, and definitely kind of like to a young customer as well, which is very, very difficult for some brands to do. And through these collaborations, they can bring in a whole new set of customers.
But I wonder that, because I always think, I agree with you in principle, but then I'm like, how does that, is it the hope that that customer will grow up and later buy it, or is it just getting them engaging with it? I guess it's kind of a mix of both, isn't it?
I think it's how the customers are dressing right now. I mean, how people are actually, you know, dressing. You can see it now. The trend normally, you know, follows. I mean, I think that before the brands were creating the trends. I think now the trends are created in, you know, streets and, you know, between young people, and then they're going to arrive like into the catwalk. And I've seen everyday customers, dressing, with Louis Vuitton and Supreme as well at the same time. So they're mixing and matching these brands, and it's cool to see that happening on a catwalk as well. So,
that high-low.
Yeah, that
well,
high
there's
and
the sweet
low.
irony because they sued
Yes.
Supreme like 15 years before, or 17 years maybe before this came out, for using the logo on the skate deck.
I think what it also kind of suggests more is how accessories have become a really big part of the menswear arena, which is something we don't often, think about. It's kind of your big duffel bags and things like that. But actually, within certain markets, men have been carrying very small handbags for years. I used to work for leather accessories label Jasmine Bean like 10 years ago, and our biggest customers were in Japan, and they were men buying handbags, like small, what we thought were handbags, just before this idea of genderless was so big, but they were buying what were traditionally being made for the female customers. And they very confidently kind of carried them. And I think this also talks of that, because even at Hermes, you had these bum bags, even the Hermes customer, in theory, is being asked to consider wearing a bum bag slung across their chest. I thought that was kind of, again, quite interesting. It's this kind of sense of how do men need to accessorize, or what sort of bags and accoutrements do they kind of need for their everyday.
But I also think that the collaboration thing is something, as a trend has started, in the last 2-3 seasons, so strong. Everyone remembers Gosha or Vetements doing so many collaborations in one show. They collaborate with so many. Junior has collaborated with North Face in the past as well, so it's not. It is new, but she's done it before. So I think that that particular collaboration between Louis Vuitton and Supreme was almost, that's the maximum you can get. Two massive brands with they both are masters of the logo, and they did that collaboration almost to say, well, this is the ultimate collaboration. You cannot go higher than that. What is going to be next after that?
Did you like it, Helen?
I did like it.
It was a divided opinion, didn't it?
No, I did like it, but I think...
Well, you can see the effect on it, all of us with the black and the red.
I don't know, I think sometimes there's a price disconnect with collaborations. Like I'm thinking more of Eastpak and Vetements, where essentially that is the same rucksack with one extra handle on it. And it's £500 or £600.
The handle costs a lot more.
What's in that handle?
What is it? It's interesting because do you not think that's a bigger part of fashion, where this sense of, and I think there are some designers that tackled this quite well, like someone like a Dries, for example, but there is this total disconnect between what something is worth and cost to make and what it is priced at, and I think that has kind of partly come through off the back of all of this collaboration stuff, is this idea of even more paying for a name.
I guess Supreme is a luxury brand as well, it always has been, but luxury to a different kind of
I don't mean
group.
so much with Supreme, because it has the same kind of cult,
exactly. That's why it's kind of smart on a level.
They work together well because their audience buys into it in that same way.
The audience is a logo-oriented audience for both of these brands. Whoever is going to buy Louis Vuitton and whoever is going to buy Supreme, they want the logo to be there. They love clothes with branding. So I think from a branding point of view and also from a marketing point of view, this is basically, you have that specific type of customer that they're going to buy it, and they belong to a whole world of, I'm wearing Louis Vuitton, and you can see, and you can tell that it's Louis Vuitton because this is the logo. The same applies to Supreme as well.
Why do some people take such offence to this? Because there were rumblings of like from sort of blogs and sort of social media through to Guy Chabot wrote that thing in the New York Times where he calls it like a murder-suicide, which was quite bizarre because I think it was like, regardless of whether you like it aesthetically, I just see it as a very, very smart move. And I actually think one of the things that in a way was brilliant about this collection was the clothes, and the rest of the collection that wasn't the Supreme collaboration was also, I thought, absolutely brilliant.
I agree.
And that's kind of a shame at the same time because it slightly got overshadowed, obviously, because everyone will know this is like the Louis Vuitton Supreme collection. But I was surprised that people took such offence to it because I didn't see it as particularly, I thought it was very clever but not particularly controversial. But I didn't get the discord about it.
I didn't find it controversial at all. I think it was kind of expected between those two, and knowing Mr. Kim Jones as well, he's someone that he knows this culture extremely well. He's not someone that he's disconnected from the youth culture, from the skate culture, or from, you know, whatever Supreme represents throughout all these years. So it's kind of like a natural thing to happen. I mean, and they both have the means and the ways and the creativity and the power to create something that is going to be iconic. I mean, it is an iconic collaboration, you know, because in the end of the day, it's going to be, I think, reviewed after years and years and years of how this collaboration happened, because they both are really masters of branding. So, you know, bringing those two together, it's something extremely unique and something that I think all the rest of retailers are going, and brands are going to look at, because the Supreme model, I mean, we have said this before, has been one of the most successful models in terms of retail. You know, the drops every Thursday that they do, you know, the way that they do it. I mean, you see now all the big retail or department stores, you know, they're following the same example and the same lead the Supreme has done.
Which is funny because it's quite a conservative, like an old school retail model in some ways. You know, it's that idea of a sort of a guest list and quite small, like, but maybe that's part of the appeal. I just find the sort of melee around this totally fascinating. Like,
well, some people were offended by it, would you say, within the fashion industry, or is it more?
I found, I think it was within the fashion industry, certain people's quite bizarre dislike.
Well, I think there's also there's
really
probably
strange.
this sense of embarrassment from a lot of those people who didn't know what Supreme was. I think a lot of people, you know, if you look at that, a lot of the you know, I don't want to say old guard because I don't mean that in a bad way, but just, you know, generally, at what point do you come into contact with a brand like Supreme? You have to kind of be around a certain type of person. You have to kind of be in Soho, or you know.
I just think you read anything. I know there were people who didn't know what it was, but I was like, why are you here?
I think some people who were like hardcore Supreme fans didn't like it. That's who I think maybe didn't like it more than.
What? And do you think that was just the kind of I liked it first type mentality? Yeah.
Oh my God, I think exactly the same. I think that if anyone felt offended by this collaboration, probably would be, you know, the really hardcore audience of Supreme. You know, that they're thinking about, well, wait a second, you know, I could buy that t-shirt for like 30 or 40 pounds. Now I have probably to pay 250 pounds, you know, to buy that t-shirt, or, you know, the same, because Supreme also is doing so many collaborations. You know, they have like so many projects that are coming out again and
Which
again.
I think is one of the smartest things about it, because then if you really object to one, there's always going to be another soon. You know, it's not like they don't put all their eggs in one sort of basket in a way.
But is this probably, you know, trying to announce something that is going to fall in the future? You think?
I don't know, because there were all
there
those
are
rumours that
you know,
they're buying Supreme, LVMH are buying Supreme. I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's just a smart. I'll probably say that and it'll get like announced tomorrow. Like, look what Lou knows. I don't know. I just think it was. I also think Kim Jones is like Louis Vuitton are kind of like, it's interesting, there's different facets to it, which is like Louis Vuitton and Supreme as the masters of the logo. Yeah. And then there's also like Supreme, you mentioned how prolific they are with their collaborations. But also like if you think of the history of Louis Vuitton ready-to-wear, particularly started by Marc Jacobs and kind of brought in, and you know, and Kim Jones has spoken quite openly, and we've, you know, he spoke to me about it after this collection about, you know, the impression that Marc's kind of openness when it came to collaboration had on him. And Kim is quite a master collaborator in quite a high-low way. You know, everyone from sort of Christopher Nemeth through to, you know, Chapman Brothers. And I think actually people who were super surprised by this, I found strange, because it is really in the Louis Vuitton DNA of collaborating with different people and almost like giving a bit of the brand to someone else for a season, even if it's slightly sort of an odd, you know, they've done the kind of awkward sort of high-low thing before, and I think it worked really well for them on women's accessories. And I think it's a really smart point that you made, where this is them kind of doing it on men's accessories, which are big now. I think
Vuitton does make its money on accessories. I don't think when you go to the stores, there isn't a huge amount of Kim Jones menswear actually hanging there for you to buy.
So the menswear does well. I always think the women's wear, I'm like, where are you?
I kind of like agree. I think that in the last period of time, I have seen way more people wearing the menswear of Louis Vuitton rather than I have seen ever before. You know, I mean, I think that men customers are engaging quite a lot with like the apparel as well, you know, not just the accessories. I mean, obviously always the accessories are going to be the strongest point of Louis Vuitton, you know, it's 100% fact, but also, you know, think that, especially this collection, you know, the apparel is absolutely beautiful.
I think,
as well.
I think this was a really great collection, and I think, you know, Alistair Mackey obviously styles it, and I think this was such a good example of where that collaboration between the two of them just works so well, because Kim obviously comes from a much more sort of sporty place, and this was all about, for the sake of obvious, it's all kind of, you know, 80s, or like 70s, 80s, 90s New York, so looking at the kind of interplay and the personal style between that group of artists, sort of Keith Haring and Basquiat and what have you. And I think they're different, like Mackie and Kim Jones are different relationships to those figures, and they're different sort of heroes of that time just came together really, really well.
But I think there is one more thing about the ski, about the collaborations. I was saying about ski because I was thinking about, for example, if you want to collaborate with a brand and you want, for example, to create like a ski jacket, or if you want like to create like a motorcycle outfit, for example, that is something very specific and very technical and very difficult to do. So exactly. So you go to the people that they know how to do it the best.
Well, that was kind of the Vetmont model, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like, we're just going to go to people who are the masters.
So this is another set of collaborations where basically, you know, instead of you saying that I'm going to take over something extremely difficult from a technical point of view to do, you know, I'm going to go to the brand that actually knows how to do it best. Which does make sense, I think. I'm conscious we could talk about Louis Vuitton Supreme for a very long time. What else was good? What else did we like? Did you have any favourite shows, Helen?
I really like Dries.
I loved Dries.
And I was surprised how much I mean, I love Dries, but I was surprised how much I liked how plain this Dries was. I do love Dries. But my favourite, like this look here, the camel coat with the jeans, it was quite exciting to see plain jeans on the catwalk.
There was a really funny moment with this look, which was backstage. People were like, because you know when it came out, everyone was like, oh, Dries is doing Vetmont, Dries is doing Balenciaga because of the wide shoulders, and someone kind of like mooted that to him backstage, and he was like, oh, actually this is the coat I designed in 2008, we just made it for the show. I was like, fabulous. It was like such a mind job. But that was what was really clever about this show, is a lot of it, which is something that Dries always does, because it was also an anniversary show, it's his 30 years.
And didn't he show in that venue?
Yeah, he showed in that venue in like, what was it? It was like 94 and 96 or something. But that process of like looking back and reissuing things that still feel current.
And remaking and reshowing and, you know, kind of being really confident to do that. I think that's what was quite interesting about the show, is that a lot of it felt quite familiar in some ways. And as you say, you can see where the references potentially, not from Dries directly, but from the time that we're seeing. You know, Dries was around then, making clothes then. So it's quite nice for him to, that sort of joke at the beginning with the, hey, I've actually shown this coat before, but here it's great, so here it is again.
I think it's something that Raf did as well. You know, like he sort of like from his shows, he wanted to show that, you know what, like I've been there and I have done this, so you know, here you are. Here you are. It's
kind of like slightly like sort of staking your claim and taking over, and you know, showing that you did it first. I think it was interesting that this show was. I'm conscious of talking about Raf in a second, but if we just stay on Dries for a bit, like this show was kind of embellishment light in a way. I know there was like the kind of the sparkly knits and what have you, but it was very much about shape and construction. Which I think also there's these different facets of what's going on in menswear at the moment. A lot of it is the surface and all those logos which we've seen come back, but another of it is kind of redefining what is a sort of a fashion conscious like shape for a man, and you know, the return of the suit I think has been really, really interesting in terms of that. But also this taps into what we're saying about collaborations, like the fact that he did all those shout outs to his factories and his mills, like super charming. And I think again it's that idea of sort of authenticity, of showing your roots and what have you. Did you like it, Dal? You're looking at it very intently.
Did I like it? Yes. Did it excite me? No. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad or good collection. That makes sense. It's good.
I found it.
I can't wax lyrical about it. But you know, I think also we should you know, pay. Maybe, you know, a lot of those logo sweaters and things remind me very much of Chris Shannon. You know, that kind of moment in menswear 5-6 years ago, London, with he's still doing now very successfully. There was something about that I found quite nice.
I was trying to work this out of like who normalised the logo, because it's everywhere. And I keep talking to people like behind the scenes, you know, like I was speaking to someone who's like quite senior at Kering when we were talking about this, and he was like, it's just everywhere, selling really well, everyone's going to do it. Like,
I mean, but also if we think about the exposure of every element of the fashion industry, the only thing that really was left were the mills. And now we're going to probably see loads and loads of interviews with these kind of people who own mills and have been making these fabrics and clothes for decades. And part of me felt a bit sad about that now these people are also exposed. They're also going to have a level of celebrity.
I was speaking to a different brand that work with, I can't remember which one it was, it's like a Japanese company that make poplin, and they were like really pissed off because they were like, we've worked with them for ages, they're quite a small company now, everyone's going to know about them and everyone's going to, so it was kind of funny, that whole...
do you see what I mean though? That exposure to kind of
to every detail.
It's like we're now going to kind of get zip makers kind of doing double page spreads and kinfolk about all of that stuff. It's just
Heaven forbid.
But it's kind of exhausting. I miss a time where we just kind of looked at a great fashion and just loved it.
Yeah, we're like,
I
that's
don't necessarily want to know who makes it.
But I think for someone like Dries, I think if someone else had done it, I would have maybe felt cynical about it. But I think with Dries,
it's authentic for what he
he's obsessed with fabric, you know, and I think has done a lot to sort of, you know, protect and preserve those relationships with the different suppliers that he works with. And I think, you know, he's an independent labeler. I think there's something. In a way, I'd much rather see that than a Kering Group logo on a...
Well, I guess also Dries is not a designer that would put his own name on the front of anything. So in that way, it's quite nice that he's buying into the logo mania, but he's doing it in a slightly twisted way. So
I just found it kind of charming. There was something like... I just found it endearing, I guess, which sounds like quite a patronising word, but no, I thought it was lovely.
But I thought the guys looked really good. They had a real kind of nice... The proportions are really... they feel very modern, but at the same time, you know, they look familiar. And I think that's very tricky to do, but it's definitely something that Dries has managed with this.
What else was good? I'm conscious there's so much to talk about, because there were a few, like, debuts and changes.
Berluti.
Should we talk about Berluti? This got kind of rave reviews, which is, I kind of want to say abnormal for a debut for a designer, because this is Heide Ackermann's sort of, what was his first collection. And people seem to really take to it. What did you think?
I think it's beautiful.
I think you could say it was awful.
No, it was just beautiful, because it's like a sort of, I said to someone the other day, it's like a dry cleaned Heide Ackermann. So Heide Ackermann's aesthetic is slightly more crushed and poetic in its textures. Like,
I've been in the opium den.
I've been, exactly. In an opium den writing poetry for months. It was slightly tighter and cleaner and more luxurious in a way that felt very right for Berluti, but also right for him to kind of move on and do that. But his colours, you know, and the fact that the girls were in the show, but they came out without any sort of, you know.
But they were wearing actual men's clothes, which I thought was super interesting, because there was all this talk at the end of the week, because obviously, as I was saying, Kenzo and Paul Smith did those collections together. But then there was also quite a few, but I think Ami did it as well, where they just whacked girls on the runway in the men's stuff. And I actually thought they looked, it was kind of a shame, because then when you did see actual women's wear worn in a men's runway, it kind of, you realise how dated some women's wear looks and how conservative it can be, you know, when like all the boys are in flats, then all the girls are in heels, you know, like, what is this? Whereas it was a complete opposite, something like this. The girls
these girls arrived on the runway with no kind of big foghorn, no announcement, and it was just utterly. You're in that when you're watching it, and when you watch the video, and when we were at the show, we were just a bit like, wow, you know, just there was no, oh hi, I'm a woman now in a menswear show. It was just so modern and real, and also they'd remade the runway to look like a kind of street, like a road, so it felt really,
They
fresh.
did do my pet peeve though, which is guitar cases on the runway, or guitars on the runway. That and dogs on the runway are like my least, there's no
dogs on a runway. No.
Dogs on a runway. What was that show? Oh, who was that? I think it was an Aggie and Sam show once where
it was Aggie and Sam.
But they didn't want to walk, so
they were like dragging them like in the
catwalk. There was a Thom Browne one as well, with a load of dogs.
It's not a good idea.
No, it's not a good idea.
So weren't they the bags, the Thom Browne one?
No, it was before that. It was like a hunt or something.
Should we actually talk about the Thom Browne show? Because I loved the Thom Browne show. I absolutely loved Thom Browne. Like, I just think the shows are kind of absolutely amazing.
Do they put videos out of the shows online?
I don't think they do.
Because it seems like a real missed opportunity.
You miss so much when you just see it.
Yeah, when you just see it like that. So for the sake of obvious, these came out one by one and walked as slow as time.
How long did it take?
Oh my god, so hours. Absolutely hours. And I was sat behind Jason Ryder from T. I keep bringing this up, I think I've said this on another panel, so I sound like I'm obsessed with him. And he was filming it walking really, really slowly, like the model. And he kept, it Instagram storying and being like me rushing to your show. It was just very funny. But then they walked so slowly, so they all came round. And then if you scroll way down to the next set of people, way down, keep scrolling. These guys came out and they walked like a wee bit faster because the ones above were wearing hooves, and then scroll. The last set of kids came out. Those ones when they were wearing like the more sort of finished look, and then they came round as a 3, which he has done before, these kind of triptychs of looks. Like it was about 3 seasons ago where like they got progressively neater. They were really messy at the start, and this one, I think it was it's just a kind of an amazing lesson in sort of performance and the, like, you know, all these questions about whether the show is relevant anymore, and you know, all these people rushing to sort of save budgets and get this, you know, as streamlined, faster show as possible. And this was just like, you know, you will sit and you will wait and you will watch this bizarre performance.
Well, also because each of those sort of matador suits, I kind of called them, but they each they are different. You know, the buttons are put on them in a different way, and so that is, again, you kind of almost didn't notice that at the time. Weirdly, because it's so slow, you think you would, but I think a part of you is where it does fall on the schedule is kind of right towards the end.
It's right at the end,
and you are slightly fatigued by the whole event of your job. So when this happens, it does come at quite an interesting time as well in where you are.
Because it's so about detail. Like I think I took this as being about the grey suit and all the potentials and possibilities for the seat, you know, where you place the pockets, whether it's a single breast or double breast, exactly the sort of the way you've done the collar and what have you. But as you say, it's kind of those small details wrapped up in this huge bit of sort of theatre, and I just found it really charming. I think it's just bonkers. Did you like it, Helen? Did you?
I didn't see it.
Did you not see it? Had you already?
I'd already departed.
You'd already on the.
Sometimes I find there's an element of torture. Thom Browne to show how long.
I think there slightly is. It's like this weird world.
I preferred it when they were presentations, when they would still do something really weird. So they had that dinner party, and they all had plates that were half sweet corn and half peas, and they were all like mechanically cutting. But you could kind of go around, maybe you can see the detail more, even though you said they were walking very slowly. When you can get right
up close. But these are such a good example where, you know, everyone's like, what's the purpose of the fashion show, blah, blah, blah. I think this is a really good example of a designer who, you know, when everyone's like, oh, well, it's up to the individual brand, blah, 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 that kind of means nothing, because you're like, well, it's not, it's an industry, and like, you know, the fashion shows play pivotal roles in that. But I think this is a really good example of a designer who knows exactly what his purpose for his show is, and it is to sort of entertain and offer a really creative proposition that he's really to spend lots of money on, that probably doesn't translate in any way to what he's selling, or, you know, what's making the money on the shop floor, and he sees this as a kind of, you know, way to flex creative muscle. And I think that's, I kind of like the conviction with which he does his shows, where he knows exactly what the purpose is, and you never feel like, you know, is this an advertising campaign, is this a what, you know, it feels very much in step.
It's also, I think it's missing, you know, I mean, it's something kind of like old-fashioned in many ways, how fashion shows used to be before, and I think it's nice that someone takes the time, the energy, the means, and put all this effort to present something like that.
No, definitely.
And it's down to the people in the crowd to decide if they want like to go or not.
Yeah,
I mean,
it does last a long time. No, I enjoyed it. What else was great? There's so much.
I really liked Y Project.
Y Project. We have, I think, do we have pictures of Y Project? We did. Okay, good. Talk to me about Y Project.
Well,
because there is this cool young set in Paris now, which is quite exciting.
It's you know, a young, relatively brand, and I think it's very, very exciting. I mean, the designer is called Glenn Martin, and he came on board of the brand about like 2 years ago. And I think they're doing like an excellent job, you know, in what they do, and they have both menswear and womenswear as well. And I find it like very, very exciting as a brand. I don't know, what do you think about the Y Project collection? But I think, I mean, not specifically this one, but overall, I think as a brand, it's a very, very exciting. It's a good one to watch.
There's so much buzz around it, isn't there?
When they have a very, very big following, and I think people and customers are really, really engaging with this brand quite a lot. It's kind of like in this similar world to Vetements and everything, but they do something very unique, and I think that there is a realness to it in many, many ways, which they I think this is why the customers and people, really love the brand.
It's such a good example of one of these ones where I think, why Vetements, not them? You know, when like Vetements just exploded, when there are other interesting young brands around, and you just think, why something, not something else? Do you know what I mean?
It's timing, isn't it? And there's not enough room for what
everyone
lots of designers do, weirdly. We kind of all like to have one that does this and one that does that. So when they cross over, maybe we have to make a decision.
We put them in their boxes.
We do, don't we?
But also I think it has to do with the brand itself. I mean, the way that they want to position themselves in the market, in the industry, and what type of communication they want to do, or how if they want to have like a very wide distribution or not, they want like to keep it extremely like smaller, or they want to be more independent and have like a growth in the future which is going to be very safe and slow and not to overdo it with things. And I think this is what is the philosophy of this brand, which I find it like very, very exciting. I mean, it's kind of like the same type of brands, like Christian Tada, for example, that they showed as well, in Paris. And I found it like, again, very cool brand, like to watch. So I think it's all these kind of like young brands in Paris.
It's interesting to see that in Paris, though, because for a long time Paris did not, like there was this split between the sort of avant-garde where you'd get sort of Homme and Dior and Rick Owens, and then the big mega brands like your Vuittons and what have you, but it did feel like there was a bit of a void in terms of young designers. And it's interesting that sort of echo up, where it feels like everyone's being a little bit more.
I think a lot of people have learned, observed London's energy and youth for a long time, and as London all of a sudden smartened up and thought, no, we're business, it sort of forgot to nurture this, and now we're seeing it in New York, we're seeing it in Paris. That's where we're now going.
People were also really clever to realise that if you have a young label, actually maybe showing in Paris is a really good way, because if you're a young label in London, so is everyone else. But if you're in Paris, actually you're kind of like
at the moment.
Yeah, you're in the moment.
There are way fewer. Way fewer small brands. I mean, London is mainly,
exactly, which is brilliant
emerging brands, which is great. This is why press and buyers are coming during London Fashion Week. But in Paris, if you're like in that level of brand, there are very, very few to do. So I think it's definitely like a brand to watch, both for men's and women's. Yeah.
Should we talk about Givenchy?
Yes.
What do we think about Riccardo Tisci leaving Givenchy? Because he has done, like whether or not, like collection by collection, whether or not you've liked this one or not like that one or whatever. Such a great example of a designer that has just like taken a house, turned it into something so successful with such a clear point of view, and now he's off. What do we all think?
And who do we think's replacing him?
Well, there's a lot of who do you think's replacing him?
Everyone is looking at you for the answer.
There's a lot of rumours, aren't there? So yes, it will be me, and I am. Yeah, what do we think about him leaving? And who would we like to see replace him?
That's the question. I mean, I think it was time for him to
I agree.
Do you? Yeah. Why do you say that?
His aesthetic and the clothes and the whole thing and the brand just look quite tired, I think. And it just didn't feel reflective of what else is going on and what else is happening.
But it's that awful thing in fashion where you're successful and then your thing becomes so successful that it's going to date. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But I mean that's a challenge of a good designer at the same time is keep going with something, but only if people like it and are buying it. Essentially, that's why some designer like Dries Van Noten, or who makes clothes that are much easier to wear, it has been successful because there's a level of easiness to what he does. I don't think the Givenchy collections are ever easy for everyone to kind of think, oh, I'll just have that, I'll just have this. It feels to me like a label that if you buy it quite extensively. I don't think you nip in and buy one Givenchy unless you're buying the
like
sweatshirt.
Those sweatshirts and stuff.
But when he started and when he first got into Givenchy, I mean, I think he dominated the market. I mean, it was like the brand that everyone was wearing. The demand was massive, and I think what he did and what he was. Every designer has a very specific aesthetic, and this is what they bring into the brand. And what he brought into Givenchy was extremely important back at the time, and I think that he made everyone, to love this brand and buy this brand, and probably brought lots and lots of millions to this brand, but also lots of press and attention.
Especially those couture. Yeah. Oh my god! Yeah. But every fashion student's background on their laptop, that couture thing.
But at some point, all these obviously are going to become a bit outdated because you know fashion moves really quick and the trends changes very, very much. So then there is the challenge of how you translate, you know, what you're doing all these years and how you can readjust things, you know, to fit into the new way and how fashion goes at the moment. And I think lots of times, you know, designers also need a bit of a challenge. I mean, I think because he's been like for so many years into Givenchy, I think that when he moves and goes to another brand, probably he's going to be challenge himself and, you know, probably create something new. And I think I completely agree that it was time to go. I think he must feel very, very happy for him also, you know.
Do we believe that he's going to Versace?
I don't know. I was going to say, I think he's a stronger women's wear designer than menswear. Like, I think in the beginning what he did with menswear was great, but then it kind of hit that point of being so successful and then he didn't go anywhere from there, whereas the women's wear is kind of, especially the couture, he's supremely talented there. It's like,
but I think his sensibility, I think it's a really good point that you make there, because I do think it's like he loves women. I kind of hate it when people say that. You know, they're like, they love women. It's like, but like he really, you know, he grew up with so many sisters, and I think there's something about that femininity that I think he just revels in, not quite in the same way with the, I don't know, I've always felt he's much more comfortable in that sort of, you know, the world he creates with the women, you know, some of those shows that he did, like, so poetic, so touching, and like really sensitive, and I just don't think that fits as well with the men's thing, which is kind of more hard, and, you know, it's like a Rottweiler, it's like, oh, you know.
It looks very, it has an Italian kind of style, you know. And I think if you even, I was thinking about this, if you look at Gianfranco Ferre's collections for Dior many decades ago, they don't look very Dior because they look incredibly Italian in whatever, you can unpack that however you want to, but I mean that in the nicest possible way, but it has that look, and I think it opens up a bigger question of what should Givenchy look like,
but that,
and what do we think it should look like?
What can it look? It's going to have to. It's a bit like when Eddie Simon left Saint Laurent. It's like whoever took over was going to have to make it look like Eddie Simon for Saint Laurent. And like it would be a total suicide, I think, if they got someone in who tried to sort of reinvent. I think they need someone in a way who's going to slightly follow in the footsteps.
Do you think?
I think so.
So Olivier Balmain, someone like that.
I think they should change it.
They should change it.
They should totally change it.
Hello.
Hello.
I think Virgil would be amazing.
Because there is a really, really big rumor that Virgil is going on the brand. So,
which they've publicly denied, which often means that it's probably going to happen.
Look at us, so trusting.
Yeah.
Who else should we talk about? There were other sort of interesting debuts, because it was Pier Paolo Piccoli's first. Who were you going to say?
I was going to say Balenciaga.
Should we talk about Balenciaga? Like, oh my god, how have we got to say finals? I thought we were talking about Balenciaga. Like, Jesus Christ, fashion can't sort of go 5 minutes without talking about Balenciaga. What did everyone think of Balenciaga? Stunned into silence. Did you like it, Helen?
I did. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was clever how he carried on with the suit thing from last time, and how that is starting to filter through in other places, that tailoring is getting kind of its place like back in menswear, where it's been missing for quite a while. And when he spoke about it afterwards, and he said it was like an office, but it was from like the intern to the CEO, so it's like this, everybody has a part.
Who's the topless guy?
Yeah, I don't know, that guy's not in my office.
not in SHOWstudio either. But it's always that weird like fetish undertone that they do so well, you know, like this, we spoke yesterday on the Milan panel about this idea of like designers really sort of considering sort of normality and things that look normal, and that I think that really ran through Paris. Actually, I felt that at so many shows, and I was thinking about this in the context of this, when it is slightly about the normal, but always with that sort of underbelly of something a bit darker, and that's what I think makes this so successful, is the mixture of banality and provocation. Lost a bit to speak, provocation, because in some ways, like, the things are normal and ugly and even unfashionable, and you know, the idea of an office, it's not something that is fashionable or cool. You think of like people coming in with their trainers and their suits, and it's like, they don't see.
Yeah, sometimes it's like the thing that is like the most repellent suddenly becomes like the most desirable.
Yeah,
I think that's quite clever if you can make that happen.
If you can tap into that, definitely.
Just to me, you know, lots of times I'm thinking, and I'm not talking specifically about Balenciaga, but I'm thinking about pretty much the trends for, you know, the next 1 or 2 seasons or 3 seasons, and obviously, you know, everyone is going for tailoring, you know, suits, shirts, it's almost the same color palettes. So at which point is that you can actually identify a check and see that this is a very specific brand that we're talking about? Because you know, when you see someone walking down the street wearing, you know, a suit, you know, probably the only way that you can understand it is probably through the shape.
Yeah.
You know, if you want like to understand, okay, which brand is that you're wearing? But it almost seems to me that lots of brands start looking quite similar.
I totally agree with that.
In a really strange way.
It is. I think they're very clever at Balenciaga and at Vetements at getting the balance right between pieces that you immediately know are them, like, you know, because it's got like some crazy statement on it, or it's got Balenciaga on the cap, and pieces that can blend in and you don't really know what it is. But I do think there is this sort of uniformity. It's the danger of when everyone's doing stuff that looks normal. Like, I did feel that at some of the shows in Paris. I wrote about this in the Ami review, and I really liked the Ami show. I think it was beautiful. But there is a danger when you do things that are so much about sort of real life, or what real men are wearing, blah, blah, blah. And then you're sat there and you're like, you feel like literally a well-dressed person in the front row could get up and start walking in that show, and people later down the road would not notice, because when it is like jeans and a great sweatshirt and what have you. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with those clothes, because it's great for people to make things that are going to have a life off the runway, but then it does make you question the purpose of a show. And I think that's what Balenciaga and Demna Gvasalia are very clever about. Is like, they do enough sort of theatre and enough provocation that you always kind of enjoy it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and also in the last, basically, you know, it's such a short period of time, and they have made a signature style basically out of this. I mean, you know, the proportions, you know, the puffer jackets, the gilets, the big scarves always, you know, so they have already like 3 or 4 items throughout the collections that they kind of like carry over, you know, and people can identify that this is Balenciaga basically.
What did we think of the Bernie Saunders logo play? Dal, where do you stand? You're staying quiet over there.
What did I think about it? I don't know. I mean, it's sort of probably got loads of hits on Instagram, which is potentially what it's designed to do, so it's done its job.
And the carrying sweater? Because it's this weird thing that they do between being like political and punchy and irreverent, whilst maintaining this thing of being like, oh, you know, it's just clothes, whatever, we don't, and it was all done with this kind of like, oh, how droll, which I think is quite clever, because then it's very hard to criticise, because they'll be like, oh, I just thought it was funny, you know, like, but I think, you know, there was like an undertone to this collection that I found relatively troublesome, but in a way that kind of interested me, like appropriating a logo of that kind in this political time, taking sort of the visibility of your brand as something that is seen as something provocative and young, appealing to young people, and using a slogan which is traditionally something that can be sort of very political, and putting the name of a luxury conglomerate on it that young people will then aspire to wear, so they look provocative and cool, but they're sort of reinforcing capitalist value. You know, I just
love Demna and his team. I love their sense of humour. I just love the fact that potentially a lot of the owners of the company or from these big groups aren't in on the joke, and that's what I like. Actually, I think it is really hysterical that they get away with this stuff, and everyone is just buying into this, like, oh my god, they're cool, they can really do whatever they want, and they are, and they're having a fucking great time doing it. And that's what I quite like about it, is that these kind of big machines are maybe not quite as in on the joke anymore. And I think that again talks to the bigger kind of shift.
Actually, he wrote the thing about, you know, seeing all the execs sat in the front row, and when that carrying setter came out, like, it was kind of the thing, like their child had made a joke and they didn't know whether to laugh or not, so they kind of like, you know, I thought it was quite a nice way of putting it. It was quite charming.
But I think in terms of a vision for how men dress, I really enjoyed this kind of smashing together of formal office wear from a particular period with sportswear. I thought they did that really well. Really well.
How are you feeling about this in the context of working somewhere like The Guardian and The Observer? Because obviously, like, you know, you're speaking to an audience of like a huge audience of men. And have you felt that for the last few years it's been very much pushing sportswear? And do you feel? But do you feel like this is relevant? Because there's so many conversations about like men don't wear suits to work anymore, blah, 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 blah. But I'm just interested when you're thinking about your reader.
Yeah, I think it is relevant, because I think there are still men that are wearing suits. They work in places where they have, like, they are wearing that's their uniform. It's kind of, it makes it more modern. It's something that people are talking about, and it relates to like lots of different people's workplaces. Lots of different men can see something in there that they wear. So it does have a broader appeal. Even if they're like, okay, I'm not going to wear that whole outfit, but there's something in there they can relate to, like whether it's trainers, whether it's a suit jacket, whether it's a hoodie.
And do you think people got slightly bored of sportswear? Do you think it became a bit, I just felt like it became such a thing.
Yeah, and there's so much of it.
Yeah.
But if that isn't your bag, then yeah, you probably are bored.
You probably are bored, yeah, that's interesting. Who else shall we discuss? There are a few people. I'd like to talk about Valentino because it was Pier Paolo Karelis. Sort of, he's in this interesting position where he keeps having to do like a debut, even though it's not a debut because he's been doing it for years, but obviously Maria Grazzi has left. And I thought this is quite I found this kind of collection really amusing because it was like taking all of Jamie Reed's typography and graphic work, which was obviously Jamie Reed, like seminal punk graphic designer, and putting it on this luxury collection. It was kind of, and one of them was like beauty as a birthright, and I found that amusingly like this cheesy thing up when you had like Joe Corey like burning all his punk stuff on the Thames and being talking about how punk had been appropriated by luxury brands, and then Valentino did this. I thought it was kind of, I don't think that was a joke, but it read as quite an amusing one. But what did we think of this collection? And I think there's a slightly harder Valentino that he's pushing since Maria Grazzi has left. It's maybe a bit more minimal and a little bit less sort of, I was thinking about this with the couture, it was less sort of virginal and princessy, slightly more mature and minimal. What did we think of this?
Yeah, it's harder, isn't it? A little bit harder.
Yeah, a bit tougher, a bit more punky, to use his obvious reference.
But not really punky.
But not really punky.
It's not really, isn't it?
Yeah.
No.
I liked it was a lot about like pieces. And like traditionally you wouldn't necessarily see all those three things in the same show coming out one after the other. So I thought in terms of the way it was all put together, it felt very wardrobe, you know, it felt very sort of lots of different one-off things that people have that they're thrown together. So I quite liked that eclectic look that you got, because that isn't something necessarily you would assume you would see at a brand like this. The slogans and things like that, I think, you know, that's not my, I didn't for the same reasons as you just highlighted, I just thought it was really embarrassing, really. It's a bit Zoolander, I think, in that sense. Especially the things that they were saying.
That they had Zoolander.
Yes, you know, and I don't know whether it just felt a little bit embarrassing, but you know, hey, there's room for everything, and there's room for there are millions of people that
I also
really
think we have a very
them.
British reaction to that because of, we see that as a part of our sort of heritage and culture, but I think for a lot of people, maybe an international audience, maybe an audience engaged with Valentino, punk is kind of these images and these graphics, whereas, I don't know, there's
it's like when you see that hand-beaded punk letter, it just really jars. I don't like it.
It's a bit like annoying, to be honest, sometimes, you know, like, I mean, because I think about it and I say, well, you don't really need to go there.
Yeah, leave it alone.
You know, leave it alone because, you know, you really don't need to. I mean, there are so many things that you can catch up on it, and they're like current, and you can do it pretty much really well, and probably fits into the whole aesthetic of Valentino, because to me it looks extremely foreign when I see that in there. And I also think about that it doesn't have like any substance for this to exist on that. You know, it doesn't say something to me personally. It just is sort of like, okay, let's put this, so we make this look cool.
Yeah,
much.
exactly.
So I think this is where
well, it's interesting given the conversations we were having about collaborations at the start, about when they gel well, and obviously this isn't a sort of the same collaboration as we were discussing, but it is that similar sort of taking one thing and trying to appropriate or use the language of it.
I do like when things are genuine. I mean, you know, when you see collaborations that are happening, that they have a sense, or it's happening because the designers or the brands want to say something, and they use that visual message basically to communicate the message with the press, the industry, the customers. But when you just borrow something, just make it look cool, I don't see.
Don't like that. What else got us excited? We haven't talked about Rick Owens, which I thought was really amazing.
I thought that it was
Rick
amazing,
Owens was
actually.
incredible. I loved it so much. I think Rick Owens for the last 4 seasons has been so every season I feel like people are, you know, when you're outside the shows and you're like, what do you like? And everyone's like, Rick. And they say it as if they're surprised, but it happens every single season, which is amazing for a designer who kind of has built his brand on such a specific language and such a clear sense of continuity.
I think what's nice about it, it's so extreme but not hard. Like there's this kind of, it's very warm.
Yeah, it was not cynical at all.
And quite sensual actually, which is something you don't often see in menswear, but there's something about this extremity, these extremities that you immediately, weirdly, are not pushed away from.
No.
And that's what I think is really clever about what Rick Owens as a brand
with this
does.
push-pull, where in some ways the models look so intimidating. It's like him as a man.
It's really amazing, actually.
Yeah, so amazing.
They're really, really beautiful, these ones. I mean, because I always think about you're like, or a Raf type of person, or a Rick type of person, but actually that was a collection that I've seen, because it's not my top favorite brand, but that collection I found fantastic.
Fantastic, yeah.
And
it was also funny given all the trend of the puffer jacket, and then he was like, I'll give you a
oh
puffer
my
jacket.
god, yeah.
He was like, you can have the wall.
It's done beautifully.
No, it was super beautiful.
Yeah.
But I do think that is what makes the brand seem really special at the moment, is when it feels really that warmth. I think that's part of the reason that Gucci is really successful, part of the reason we know we were talking about Vuitton and Supreme, how the fact that Kim Jones is very interested in that culture. It's just when things feel cynical, I think it feels really jarring, and maybe that jarringness is why something like Balenciaga is doing really well. But I think the flip side to that is people want something that feels warm and feels like it's not done with a kind of trend report or a sort of a cynicism to the consumer in mind. And I think that's the thing with Rick, is like that push-pull thing. He's really warm as a person, but then he lives this kind of life that seems really intimidating. I think that's interesting.
Was there anything you didn't like in Paris?
Oh yeah, there was a lot that I didn't like.
Anything you want to share with us?
I thought there was a lot of really bad casting, which was quite racist, which I didn't enjoy. What didn't I like?
Or any of you, like, not maybe I didn't like, but were disappointed by.
Disappointed
so I can't really
by.
think of anything, but I tend to kind of shut it out of my head.
Yeah, I think because it was just so much better than Milan.
Yeah,
Milan was like so flat, apart from Prada, that this was like a
bit of a lift.
Yeah,
there's nothing I really didn't like, because I think Paris is. I always really like the eclecticism of Paris, because you kind of can't think about like trends or themes in Paris. Like, yeah, there are these general sort of men's and women's things. Actually, that was one thing that I felt really didn't work well. Is I thought Paul Smith, actually, it was kind of fine, the men's and women's together. They did it in quite a clever way, especially because his women's has always worked really well when it looks like his men's. I felt like with Kenzo, they hadn't quite got the balance of how long those shows should be. You know, it was like literally like a men's show and then a women's show. And I think that, like, not that as a concept or something, was like, no one's quite figured this out yet. But Paris is so eclectic. That's the best thing about it. It's like nothing really looks like anything else. So.
What about Raf, that he wasn't in Paris this season, though?
Yeah, should we talk about that?
I mean, I thought that it was.
I found this a bit underwhelming, actually. Maybe that was the thing.
The collection, you
yeah,
mean? The collection itself, yeah. Do you think it has to do with, you know, him being in Calvin Klein?
I think he's just really busy. I didn't hate it. I thought he's
got loads on.
but also where he has. Like, I think it was slightly that thing of I loved last season so much. Yeah. I mean, I liked I love graphics, and I think I love a power motif, so I enjoyed that. And I like it when he sort of dips into his archive and does things that he does really well. I think it did feel much more grown up, which was interesting, because a lot of the collections recently have felt like so teenage, American teenager. I just didn't feel it. But then it's like, how do you follow something like the Maplethorpe collection? It's so difficult. That was such a sort of seminal collection.
And he has done, like, you know, I mean, you have like the Sterling Ruby collaboration that he's done, and then you have like the Robert Mapplethorpe, which was super, super strong. I mean,
and you can't maintain that pace, or you can't always be doing a kind of.
I always think one thing about Raf is that you need a bit of time, you know, until it starts growing on you. You know, and this is something that, you know, I keep hearing throughout the seasons from many people, is that the reactions when you first see a show are not always 100%, you know, good ones. But then later on, you know, you see that people do understand it after like a few months, and until the point that it's going to hit the stores, I think that this is when the excitement is quite high and stuff.
It was weird not having him on the Paris schedule, like, because Gosha was missing and Raf was missing. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying, because there is so much in Paris anyway. It's easier to, like, I think it's so smart what you said, Helen. I totally agree. Like, Milan felt weird. Like, it felt like there was these gaping holes, whereas Paris, it's like there's so much that almost any brand could not show for one season, and it wouldn't make that much of a difference. Like, I missed seeing Raf in Paris. It was a shame, but then there's like there are all these different camps. Like there's the Japanese designers, and then you've got like the younger set, and then you've got the big luxury brand. And I just feel like there's so much going on there that it's kind of hard to.
I personally think that Raf show is always a really, really strong point for Paris Fashion Week.
Yeah.
And I think, but lots of Paris and press, really, really find it as one of the mainly
The
key
key
shows, that you have to go there.
Well, it sets the
and,
pace in a way.
It does.
Yeah.
And I think that he has revived quite a lot of like good styles from his older collections. It is definitely more grown up in a sense collection. Way more wearable, easier shapes from the ones that they had before, but still I think there are quite a lot of like strong ideas, not so visible, not so loud perhaps as they were like in the previous seasons, but still present. I think present there. And
I thought of something I hated. I thought Dior was terrible. Like truly awful. Like sorry.
Don't hold back.
No, I really like Chris Van. I think it's an amazing design. I love, but what the hell? Like this, like rave. They should let us rave. Who? Like who's stopping you?
The best thing was the hard Dior.
Oh my god, that was awful. That was the thing that Charlie wrote. I know I keep quoting Charlie, which is a bit weird, but he did some smashing reviews this season where he said. Yeah, they'd called it hard Dior, and he was like, you have to write it in capitals, because if you write it in lowercase, it does look like a spelling mistake. And then he wrote it, so it's true. I just thought it was weird. I didn't hate it. There were some nice pieces in there.
No, I think
it just made no sense to me.
Like, there's a lack of ideas, I think, with Dior. It's very. We've seen.
But I've really liked it a lot recently. I have really liked some of the collections recently, and I like them when they. I thought like using Mr. Dior. It was Christian Dior's birthday, and then they had a big sweater with his face that said like rave. I can't remember what it said, but there was a lot of. I just think when you're a big luxury brand, you can't do like this kind of edgy youth spirit. Like we want to rave, let us party. It's like what? Like it just doesn't work. Like, and I found that a little. Yeah.
I think that Chris Van Noten is a really, really amazing designer when it comes down to quality and fits. When you see the clothes and the garments that he does, I think it's one of like the best fitting trousers, suit jackets. It's more kind of like commercial in a good sense pieces that actually guys can wear from like
it was
every
just
day.
like the themed.
I think the themed and everything. I think this is something that. Some of the times it doesn't really work for Dior.
Also from the collaboration with the artist Elliot Witz, I think it is Witz, the painter, I thought that could have been used much, much more intelligently rather than being printed onto kind of polyester and then made into several garments which appeared towards the end. That was really disappointing because the paintings are beautiful and actually the invitation was just one of them and that was enough. But then when you saw how he'd used it, I thought that was really disappointing as well.
Sometimes they're a bit heavy-handed with the theme, aren't they?
I think that's exactly it. It's like heavy-handed, and it will be interesting to see how it evolves in the context of what's happening with the women's wear. Because it's like the women's wear is now so sort of, and but it also has such a clear point of view, and it's like, will the men's become like even more kind of hard and masculine, or will it go more? I don't know.
Talking about the jumper?
What does that say? I haven't actually got my glasses on.
But he's been there for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
No.
He's been there a long time.
About 10 years.
Yeah.
And what I found really strange is that there he is, look.
They should
just let us rave.
I found it really interesting the Inside Dior documentary that's on Channel 4 at the moment. The second part I think is on Thursday.
Yeah.
First whole sec not mention him once or menswear or anything.
Really?
And I think, there's always that thing I always find really weird. That he doesn't seem, they're obviously very happy with him and his work, but you never really think of him as Dior.
Yeah, well, I think the women's wear gets really overshadowed. I think it's always really difficult as well because when people talk a lot about the heritage of Dior and Christian Dior, which in itself is really difficult because he was only there for 10 years, so it's not like there is this wealth of heritage of Dior. But it always comes back to sort of the women's and the history and the new look and like the men's is. I think it is. It's a hard job. I just found awkward.
I also think how important it is for the whole brand. I mean, because obviously Dior is massive, so how important it is to put forward the menswear or keep it for the women's wear and keep like, the attention for the women's wear. But also I think that Chris Van Noten also comes from the designer point of view, and I think he's a bit more low-key in many ways as a designer. I don't think that
he wants the bells and whistles.
Probably, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe he's furious. He obviously just wants to rave, so let him rave. Is there anyone else that we should discuss? Have we missed anyone? I feel like
Margiela.
Margiela. Oh yeah, that was very good, wasn't it? I like Margiela.
I really love Margiela as well.
Acne as well, the big art history lecture that we were given.
Oh, I love the art history lecture.
Yeah, I really love this collection.
It is interesting to see brands play with sort of format and medium and presentation, because you kind of feel like, I do think, you know, for a while it felt like it was kind of impossible to do anything new, like it was like whether you did a presentation or a show, but there was something about the intimacy of this Margiela, like you don't really get a sense of it at all in the pictures. The presentation, like the boys were just sitting around reading.
They always used to be like that.
Yeah.
They were always really successful.
Yeah.
They were like slightly a bit odd.
Yeah.
And then when it became a show, it kind of lost that.
Yeah, it loses the intimacy, doesn't it? But the collection's beautiful.
I really love this collection. Yeah.
But it seemed that lots of brands, or a handful of brands, really, rather than getting super political in a really hard way, they went the opposite way. So they're looking at the beat, they're looking at poetry, they're looking how kind of traditionally art movements have kind of been born out of difficult times, which arguably we're in the middle of one now. So it's almost very interesting to see them, everyone go quite soft and quite limp, almost.
Well, I think it's this thing where it's like in difficult times, like people almost look at things more, so then these hard big statements, maybe that's what we were saying about Dior, they don't feel as relevant. It's like things have to feel a bit more intimate and a bit more honest. I think otherwise you start even more to see through things. No, I did think this worked really, really well. It was lovely.
And I thought, again, about Acne Studios, the art history lecture that we were kind of all treated to, which was in 4 parts, was really, really smart, because you were, again, in a similar way to the Thom Browne show, you kind of that slowing down, but at the same time you really felt nourished. I mean, your brain was left with something. You know, whether you say for 2 minutes or the whole hour, as I did, you left with something, and I think that's what's really lovely.
Which is also really rare. Like often when you leave fashion show, you're like, well, that's 20 minutes of my life that I'll never get back. And I hate saying that because we're so privileged and lucky to go to these things. And when you see an amazing one, you're like, that is amazing.
Exactly.
But then when you see something which just feels like a waste of time and a waste of money, and you're like, like when I left that Dior thing, I was like, Jesus Christ! I was like, that, like all that money spent on that. Like, I was like, let the kids rave. Use it as a rave. I don't know. It just that got on my nerves.
What do you think about Gosha?
We talked a lot about Gosha yesterday, so I don't want to go too much into it. I liked it. I thought it is what it is. I thought it was really cocky to show during Pitti, and probably a bit of a 2 fingers up to Pitti, given they supported him last season. I don't know. I think.
What do you think about the location?
I think it's really hard, because in one sense it's like how amazing, how authentic to show, you know, in his home country and get people from the fashion industry to go over there, but then it's like at the same time they're going to see they're not going to see any of the reality. I think that, and then it gets in that territory of those big cruise shows where people are kind of flown somewhere to write about something.
Also, this is like a football collection, and the World Cup is in Russia. So the next few shows that he's doing are all in Russia.
Yeah.
So
they're going to be there,
that makes sense. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to go to Russia and it's and there's a whole, obviously, a big political thing as well. I don't think that's the reason. I think it's purely, this is a football collection with Adidas, and the World Cup is in Russia.
It's in Russia. But then there is something kind of inherently political about it, because he is so proud of his country, you know, and I think that is really amazing, because you often see him interviewed and people are kind of like presume that he must sort of be always wanting to make some statement about how awful life is there, and like, there's something interesting, but I think it just gets dangerous, doesn't it, when there's the smoke and mirrors of like, I think the reportage around this was quite interesting. It felt like every journalist was kind of a publicist rather than a critic for this, which was fine, I guess, because he is a very popular designer. But I think the pieces are really lovely. It's a really smart collaboration. I don't know, it just is what it is. I haven't quite made my mind up about it yet. Did you like it?
Yeah, I think he's a really amazing storyteller for me, you know, Gosha, and he's got like a whole world that definitely connects with a really, really wide audience and worldwide as well. I kind of like the cleanliness of this collection, perhaps because, you know, the current season, it's a great one because we saw last season, you know, so many collaborations happening from like Fila to everyone, but Sergio Tacchini, everyone, and this one is just Adidas, you know, and this is probably, you know, it's cleaner. It's definitely, there are like really good pieces and styles in there. I like the fact that you can see lots of Adidas in there, but then at the same time, I like when he does his own stuff. The more tailoring, the more coats, the more jackets. I really do love when he does this and I think customers do want it more and more and more.
Yeah.
But I think I agree with you as well. That Gosha really loves, of course, Russia, and he wants, and it's the same group of people with Lotte as well. That they want to show the best,
culture,
the culture in a really, really good and positive way.
I also think there's this interesting thing of him not wanting to be. He's always said that he doesn't want to be like a fashion designer, and I think I interviewed him straight after Pitti, but in Paris. And he was saying that, this was obviously before any of this had got announced, and he was saying that he didn't think he would show in Paris again. He just wanted to keep moving it around. And I think part of that emphasis probably comes from the fact that he doesn't want to just be seen as a fashion designer. And it's always for him been about these projects, whether it's the films or, whatever, the photography and the books and what have you. So actually, in a way, like removing yourself from that context.
Well, I think if he should go a step further and remove himself from the context of a fashion show, I think that's the bit that jars with me. I think, because this isn't fashion for me. I respect kind of what he's doing and what he's done, but I think there's something jarring about seeing these kind of young boys in this kind of show space. I think you could just take it a little bit further, and actually you're taking people this far, and you're kind of taking them on a real journey to try and understand where you've come from.
He had them speaking, which did make it feel like...
Yeah, but I think they were saying really generic things like, I really want to, I love football and things like that, because a friend of mine translated it for me, my friend was hysterical. He was like, this is so stupid, why are they saying this stuff? But of course everyone there was like, oh my god, this is so profound. And you've got this kind of 15-year-old kid going, I love football, love girls. Imagine translating that into an English, British context, or any context, you're a local. I think because it's foreign to us.
Yeah, but people exoticize it.
For sure. I think that's what a lot of the attention it gets. That's what it's fueled by, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's a reason for its elevated status.
But also think that other brands like, for example, Supreme or Palace are not doing shows in that sense. They don't have like any fashion shows, and if this is the main customer of Gosha, who is that type of customer, then obviously maybe the format of the fashion show as we know it so far, maybe doesn't apply anymore to his brand, and they're thinking about because that's supposed to be live streamed as well as a show, and obviously for the wider audience that they want to catching up with it, so they might choose like a different type of format, to showcase this collection without perhaps following, Paris Fashion Week, showing there because it's easier for press.
I don't think he needs to show that. I like it. That was one of the things that I did. I think, but I almost thought, why even invite press? Like that's what I kind of found. I was like, do this amazing thing. I mean, maybe that's really pedantic because obviously press should go and cover because it's an interesting thing. But like, I think the side of it that I didn't like was it felt like it was almost like the Paris show just moved to a different place rather than it being like this own special, which is maybe I didn't go, so it's maybe like if I'd have been there I would have felt differently.
Maybe it's a transitional period. Maybe like in a few seasons time they're going to think about that kind of like type format, of like people just walking up and down, a catwalk. Maybe it's not working for us, and we need like to launch like really beautiful. I mean, to me, it almost feels that I would love to see that brand launch with massively beautifully campaigns, everywhere.
Exactly,
instead of actually having like a format of a catwalk show, because he's an amazing photographer. So take your models, put your clothes and do like a really amazing campaign, and actually launch this to press and buyers, because everyone can visit the Paris showroom and also see the collection there too. So in real life, so take everything that you have, and he's extremely good at to do it in a completely different format, because he can do that.
No, I agree. I think that, but that's kind of the thing that came out of this Paris Fashion Week, I think, was like everyone sort of doing things in the way that feels true to what they're good at. Maybe that is why we all like Rick, because it felt very Rick, and maybe that is why we all like Vuitton, because it felt very Kim. Do we think it was like a strong season? Not so sure.
Loads of great things, loads of great clothes, loads of great stories, loads of great kind of questions around fashion that are always thrown up. But I think generally we seem to have reached a level of silhouette and shape that I think everyone's sort of seeming to agree on right now.
That's very true.
And normally we could unpack that as being really frustrating because it's not new, but I actually think that's quite nice that you're recognizing that bigger shoulder everywhere. We're seeing more tailoring over a track pant everywhere. I actually find that quite comforting because all of a sudden it feels like all of this stuff now makes a lot more sense when you think about who is looking at it and where it's being shown. I think there's something quite nice about, I think this Paris Fashion Week felt very very on a level. There was not that much that jarred, and as you say, kind of every brand that showed kind of felt very true to what it was doing.
There's a spirit of the times, isn't there, which is interesting to observe. Do you agree with that, Helen? What Dal was saying?
I agree.
Yeah. Oh, everyone's in agreement, much like the designers themselves. Should we give them a round of applause for giving us so much to